Hi, everybody. Welcome to another weekly current affairs session. So, we're going to cover from the date 2nd of August to 8th of August, and we have 9 important articles to cover. There are certain articles which are factual based, and also some articles which are, text and context based. So, let's begin with our current affairs session. The first article we're going to cover is the Glow Lake. This was very much in the news that Glow Lake of Arunachal Pradesh has been listed in Ramsar sites, and it is the 101st uh, lake to be listed under Ramsar's list. If you look into the achievement, a lot of you might think it is an good achievement, but however, you should keep in mind that lakes getting listed in Ramsar site is not something to be cherished and not something to be happy. It is rather something of a concern, because the inclusion of lakes in Ramsar site is a threat to the wetlands. However, this is the lake of Arunachal Pradesh. If you look into the map of Arunachal Pradesh, here you will find the Glow Lake in the Lohit district of Arunachal Pradesh. So this is the Glow Lake in the Lohit district of Arunachal Pradesh. And also you should remember that here there is a river which is called as the Rohit River. This lake falls under the territory or under the region of the Kamleng Tiger Reserve, which is a very popular tiger reserve in Arunachal Pradesh. And just some kilometers away from this lake, you'll find the Namdapha National Park in the Changlang district of Arunachal Pradesh. And this national park is famous for its flying squirrel. Flying squirrel. Apart from this lake, there are other lakes of in the northeast region, such as the Diporbil in Assam, then the Rudrasagar Lake in Tripura, Pala Lake in Mizoram, and the very famous Loktak Lake in Manipur. But remember, this is the first Ramsar listed lake of Arunachal Pradesh, and it is India's 101st. Okay. Okay, if we talk about this lake, the lake is very much rich with biodiversity and has around 150 tree species and around 49 orchid species. And it is a crucial habitat for the white-billed heron. And around this lake, you'll find the tribe which is called as the Mishmi tribe. They are the largest tribe in Arunachal Pradesh and also one of the oldest tribe of Northeast India. This is the Mishmi tribe. Around this lake, you will find particularly the Mishmi, the Digaru Mishmi, and the Idu Mishmi. Well, now, what is Ramsar Convention? See, Ramsar Convention is a framework which was adopted in the year 971 in a city Ramsar in Iran, and thus it got his name Ramsar Convention. What is the purpose? What is the objective of this convention? The objective of this convention is to protect wetlands which have high international importance. Example: any wetland where there are habitat to migratory species, particularly birds. Those lakes have international importance because the birds all over the world travels to this wetland for breeding or other purposes. So it becomes a common responsibility for the entire globe to protect these wetlands. So in India, the first wetland was declared as the Chilika Lake of Odisha. If you look into the largest wetland is Sundarban. If you look into the highest wetland is So Moriri of Ladakh. It is somewhat around 5,000 to 6,000 meter in height, and the smallest is in Himachal Pradesh, the Renuka Lake. And this Renuka Lake was mythologically it is believed that it was built by Pashuram in the memory of his mother. So the article is Glow Lake, the 101st and the first Ramsar Lake of Arunachal Pradesh. The next article is our Nuaru renamed to Nyawaro. Though the pronunciation might be a little different, but the Nuaru country, which is an republic country, an independent country, has renamed into a name Na Nawaro. Now, what was the reason behind the name? of changing the name, the reason was basically pronunciation by the indigenous people. The indigenous people did not pronounce it as Nauru, they pronounce it as Naoro. So, keeping in mind the indigenous people and the local people, the country has been renamed. If you look into the location, where is the country located? This is the coast of Australia. Okay, here you'll find a country which is called as Papua New Guinea. Here, then you'll find a country called Solomon Island. Then you'll find the Fiji. Then you'll find Tuvalu, Kiribati, and here you find your Nauru or the Naoro. This entire region is also known as Micronesia. And remember, in Micronesia, Papua New Guinea, Nauru, Solomon Island, Fiji, Tuvalu, and Kiribati are very much in the news. They frequently come in the news. So remember the location of this particular island. Now, if you look into certain characteristics of this island, it is the smallest, third smallest country of the world, and it is the smallest independent republic. So that is why this becomes important, and it's eye catching for the aspirants. Usually countries, whenever the countries names are changed, they are usually not kept in the news or not given importance, but this becomes important. Why? Third smallest country and the smallest independent republic. If you look into the population of this country, it is hardly 12,000 persons. Okay, 12,000 persons or 12,000 residents. So it is extremely small country. If you look into their economy, okay, they are mainly based on coral reefs. There are coral reefs, and all of this country which you see, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Tuvalu, Kiribati, and then Solomon, these are all coral reef islands. You see here there is this specific ring of fire, and thus these islands are very much rich with coral reefs. So their economy is mainly based on coral reefs. Economy is based on fishing, to some extent tourism, and there is also certain ability of critical minerals and rare earth minerals, but very limited. They primarily depend on fishing, tourism, and coral reefs. Now, this country is based on Westminster system. As because this was in the news, this becomes important. This is nothing. Westminster system is nothing, but it is basically the parliamentary system of governance, where there is the head of the state, that is the president. Then there is the prime minister. The prime minister is prime minister heads the council of minister. Okay, this is called as the Westminster system of governance, and this is what we have in our India also. So Nauru has the same system of governance. The next article is our Hubara bastard. This Hubara bastard was in news because Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and UAE has released around more than 600 Hubaru bastard into the Aral Sea region. Now, when you hear the word Aral Sea, you might think that why are birds being released in Aral Sea? Basically, the name Aral Sea does not depicts a large sea. It is a sea which has completely dried up, not completely, a very less portion of the sea has some water contained, but around 80% of the sea has completely dried up. This particular Aral Sea is located in Central Asia, and during 1960s, when there was this uh, industrialization growth happening in the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union basically diverted the rivers water into the industries and the agricultural field, and also they used the water source of Aral Sea for the industrial development. And as a result, the entire water body, the Aral Sea, was contaminated, and these water bodies started drying. And as a result, there was a huge loss of biodiversity. So today, if you look into Aral Sea, if this was the size of the Aral Sea, today only the small size or on this small portion is left. The rest other part of the Aral Sea has converted into a kind of a desert or kind of a semi desert. Now, as it is not possible for human beings to completely again fill up this large water body, so as it has converted into desert, so now it is the responsibility of the citizens or the globe to maintain its biodiversity as it is now, that is in a desertic or semi desertic condition. That is why these Hubaru bastards were released in this region of Aral Sea, which is a semi-desertic biodiversity. Now, why is this bird chosen? Because they have the best adaptability in semi-arid region, and apart from this, they are also omnivorous. So they feed on seeds, they feed on insects, and etc. So it becomes easier for them to survive. If you look into the conservation status, as per IUCN, they are vulnerable. In CITES listing, they fall under Appendix 1, and in CMS, that is the Convention on Migratory Species, they fall on Appendix 1. So basically, we can say that they have higher priority in terms of the conservation status. And in the forthcoming, they will be listed in the Asian Red Data Book. So this is about the Hovero bastard and the release of Hovero bastard in the Central Asia. If you talk about India, in India, definitely if they are in their habitat is semi-desertic. So in India, we can say that they are found in Gujarat and Rajasthan. Primarily found in Gujarat and Rajasthan. Apart from this, they are also named as the McQueen bastard or the Asian Hubaro. The next article is the 2026 NATO Ankara summit. See, not recently, it has been a few days, but this was in the news last week regarding what were the commitments made by the members of NATO in their summit in Ankara. So this summit happened in on July 7th and July 8th, but the commitments of the meeting was published in last week newspaper, so that is why I have covered it. Now let us look into the commitment what these members they made, and how this commitment is going to impact India, or how does it has a kind of a negative impact in India. So first we'll go and look into the commitments. So the first commitment they said is that they're going to expand their defense spending. That is, they said that by 2035, the GDP in defense spending should increase by 5%. And why did they do this? Because they have realized, I mean, particularly USA has realized that it is difficult to keep fighting wars in different fronts around the globe. So, like we know, the NATO members, they get protected by their big brother USA, and definitely USA has realized this, that with the rising time, particularly in the Ukraine, what is happening, it is difficult to get engaged in a kinetic war or a full-fledged war in different parts of the world. So it is better that these countries who are NATO members, if they are self-reliant and if they have full equipments or military equipments to protect themselves, then the burden of supporting them in USA is going to reduce. So the first most important commitment is the increase of spending in defense target. Second is commitment is to support Ukraine throughout 2026. That is, they've pledged around 70 billion pounds of military equipments, training and procurement support to Ukraine throughout 2026, though Ukraine is not a member yet. Third is their defense industrial base. That is, they have agreed to build a high-tech European defense industrial base for regional manufacturing and lower the alliance of 50% dependency on USA. Like I have said, USA have understood by now it is difficult to fight war on different fronts of the world. So that is why they are planning to make the countries of NATO self-reliant. There is Atmanirbhar in terms of protection. Though US is going to support them, is going to provide them with information, technology, and other investment, but the primary objective of protection or security will be on the country which are or which is in problem. So USA is going to support. So that is why 50% dependency of USA in defense capability has to be reduced. And the third is the emerging technology. That is, they have prioritized joint investment among the nations for development of AI, cyber security, and other information technology in terms of defense sector. So these are the four priorities which were given in the Ankara summit, and these priorities has become a kind of a not a problem, but will create a problem in near future in in respect to India. Now, if you look into NATO, what is NATO? NATO is an intergovernmental organization which was formed after the Cold War to counter the influence or to counter the expansion of Russian influence around the globe. So the country, I mean the agreement was headed by USA, wherein they formed the countries around the who are around the Atlantic region, wherein they say that we are going to be one alliance and we are going to protect each other. So this is what, in simple word, is NATO. Now it was established by the North Atlantic, which is also called as the Washington Treaty. So Washington Treaty, if it is in the news, is directly related to NATO, and in 1949. And today, if you look into, there are around 32 member countries. It started with just 12 member countries, but today there are 32 member countries. And the latest, I mean the 32nd country is basically Finland. Sorry, Finland is not 32nd, Finland is 31st. The 31st is Finland, who entered into NATO in 2023, and the 32nd country is your Finland, who became a NATO member in 2024. In NATO, you have to remember this particular point, Article 5 and Article 4. What does Article 5 talks about? Article 5 talks about that an attack in one member of NATO is considered an attack to all the members of NATO. So if Ukraine becomes a NATO member, then if Russia attacks Ukraine, then Russia is basically directly attacking all the other countries of NATO. USA, UK, etc. All the 32 members. So all the 32 they have to fight against all the 32 members. The Article 4. And what is Article 5? What is Article 4? Article 4 talks about that the members will consult together in terms of threat. That is, no member will be left behind if there is any threat. So the members will consult, they'll share information, and also they will share data during the consultation of any kind of threat. So Article 5 and Article 4. Now the point is, how will this particular commitment, which we say that one in the expansion of uh, uh, defense expenses, second is to protect Ukraine, third is to make investment in information and technology for development of military equipments, and the fourth is development of AI or the cyber security, improve cyber security. So how will all of these, particularly the first one which talks about investment in defense, will affect India? So basically in India you will see that if these countries are more investing in their defense manufacturing or defense equipment manufacturing, then the entire market will turn from a buyer market to a seller market. That is, where if they have more products which are manufactured, then definitely they will go to sell them in the international market. So if everyone starts producing, who is going to buy? So this is going to be a concern in the international market, wherein India today is moving into this stage of selling defense equipments or defense manufacturing products. So it could be a competition in the global market. Next, there will be delay in critical supplies because these countries are going to share the critical supplies among themselves, and the other countries, particularly India, might face a little problem in terms of delaying of critical supplies. But however, this does not mean that India is going to uh, uh, lack the development on the sale of defense products, but this could be a blessing in disguise also, as like with these India can more focus into the Atmanirbhar Bharat or the self reliance India. So the good things, okay, what is the India's necessary response, or what could be better in this particular situation is, first the India should focus into Atmanirbhar Bharat or self reliance in terms of defense manufacturing. So India also has to invest more or into defense sector. Then this will create a resilient in the supply chain, and this will definitely help, or India will definitely have to work towards giving opportunities to private companies in development of defense mechanism or defense products or equipments. And we have seen in the recent time how private companies has done tremendously good in space technology in India. And in the same way, in the defense sector also, private companies are doing very good, but Indian government has to give them more opportunities and scopes to do much better. This will basically lead to a creation of new age technology resilience, and definitely will enable us with future preparedness and deterrence. So the commitments can be a problem for the globe, but we have to be optimistic and utilize the maximum resources or maximum ideas to bring the best out of this particular problem. The next article is your Pingali Venkaya. Okay, Pingali Venkaya, recently you have celebrated the 150th birthday anniversary of Pingali Venkaya. Pingali Venkaya was the person who was behind the design and crafting of today's Indian map, that is the Tiranga. So Pingali was a freedom fighter, he was a educationist, he was a linguistic, and also he was a agriculturalist and geologist. So Pingali was a very prominent and also very profounding freedom fighter during the freedom struggle of India. Pingali was a subordinate, not a subordinate, but Pingali was along Mahatma Gandhi's fight with the British. Basically, Pingali met Mahatma Gandhi in South Africa during the Second Boer War in 1899 to 1902. And in 1904, he came back to India and started fighting against the British with alongside Mahatma Gandhi. And during this time period, Pingali basically drew or basically crafted or basically designed the Indian map in 1921, which consisted of three stripes: white, green, and red, and there was a charkha in between. This was further modified in 1931 during the INC meeting, wherein they gave the color of saffron green and put this white color in between as an indication of peace, and put the charkha in between. And later on, after the independence, we get our present day form of the flag. And in 2009, out of respect, he was also honored in the Indian stamp. So this is all about Pingali, who was basically the crafter or the designer of present day Indian flag Tiranga. The next article is the Clouded Leopard Conservation Action Plan, that is Clouded Leopard CAP. Now, recently on 4th of August, we have celebrated the International Clouded Leopard Day. And because of this, Indian government on this day has opted for the protection and preservation of clouded leopard in India. Alongside, it was also in the news that the Meghalayan government has given out utmost priority in the protection and conservation of clouded leopard. Why was this Meghalayan government in the news? It is because Meghalaya considers the clouded leopard as their state animal. And now, if you talk about leopards, there are three different kinds of leopard we know about. The first is the normal, or we call it as just leopard. The second is the clouded leopard, and the third is the snow leopard. We're going to look into all of these three leopard, but now let's look into the clouded leopard from this article. This particular CAP, that is Conservation Action Plan of clouded leopard, was established in 2018 by Espinel Foundation, a British charity for the protection of clouded leopard, and also for improvement of scientific monitoring and biological assistance to these leopards in terms of spread of diseases and other health issues. It is under the Northern Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change. And the preparedness is prepared under the Indian GEF UNDP initiative, that is Global Environmental Facility United Nations Development Program initiative. These clouded leopards are wonderful climbers, and they stay at a height which is somewhat between 2000 to almost 3500 above the sea level meter in the on the mountains, not exactly on the mountains, but you can say that they basically stay on the high hills which is above 2000 meter, in between 3500 meter or 3000 meter. And you will find this clouded leopard present in the entire region of Northeast India. If you look into India, leopards are found everywhere. The distribution of leopard is found everywhere in India. Clouded leopards are particularly found in the hills or high hills of Northeast India. Why they are called as clouded leopard? It is because of their height in which they are found. At that particular height, it is basically the clouds which are very easily visible at that height of the mountain. And these leopards, as they stay on this height, they have been named as the clouded leopard. They are wonderful climbers, and they are basically um, uh, both nocturnal and also a daytime hunter. That is, at night they hunt during the day only if there are no predators around, but if there are predators around, they become nocturnal at night. So the behavior of hunting is both daytime and nighttime nocturnal. If you look into conservation status, they are under the vulnerable status of IUCN. In sites listing, they are in Appendix 1, and in Wildlife Protection Act, they are in Schedule 1. So basically, they get utmost priority in terms of conservation. If you look into the body structure, the body structures are more like a Deber coat, okay, which looks like a cloud, But if you look into the leopard, normal leopard, this normal leopard has like a paw-like structure in their body, okay, paw-like structure. They are mainly found in this Southeast Asian region like India, China, Myanmar, Bhutan, and parts of Indonesia. But in India, they are particularly found in Northeast, all the states of Northeast, Sikkim, Arunachal, Assam, Nagaland, Mizoram, uh, Tripura, and particularly definitely Meghalaya, which has named them as the state animal. Now, if you look in the difference between all these three leopards, this is the normal leopard, which is generally considered as leopard. Then you have this clouded leopard, and then you have a very popular or famous snow leopard. If you look into leopard, leopards are found in forest, in grassland, in deserts, mountain, and they are widely distributed across India. They are found almost everywhere. You'll find them in Madhya Pradesh, you'll find them in Gujarat, you'll find them in Uttar Pradesh, almost everywhere. Basically, they stay in grasslands. They can stay in grasslands. They can stay in areas of scrubs. They can stay in the areas of mangroves. They can stay in the areas of not that high mountains, but comparatively higher mountains, say around 500 meter or up to 1000 meter. They are found. Okay. Next, you have this clouded leopard, which is basically found in this region of Northeast India and of Assam, and the location or their habitat is somewhat above 2000 meter until 3000 3500 meter. Next, you have the snow leopard. This is very unique. Okay, it is said that the sighting of snow leopard is a blessing in this Himalayan region. That is, you do not generally sight the snow leopard. Why? First thing is that they are not, they basically are seen in the remote locations of the mountain which are covered with snow for almost throughout the year, and also their body color camouflages with the snow, and their sighting is very much limited. So they are found at a higher altitude of the mountain where there is cover of snow. And also remember, snow leopards are not found in alpine forest, they are found in rugged topography of the mountains, that is particularly in those places where the number of trees and other plant species are comparatively very very low. So you can consider that this snow leopard is somewhat kind of a mountainous cat. But these two are not mountainous, but they are wonderful climbers because they have to stay in dense forest or deciduous forest. So they are good climbers and they stay on the trees particularly. But snow leopards, they stay but particularly on the caves. Where are they found? They are found throughout the Himalayan state, Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, yes, Ladakh. You'll find the snow leopard in this region. However, remember Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, they're popular for snow leopard. There are also sightings of snow leopard in Arunachal Pradesh, but that is extremely limited. The proper sighting of snow leopards are particularly in this region of Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, and Himachal Pradesh particularly. If you look into conservation status, all of these three leopards are they have the same conservation status of IUCN Vulnerable Wildlife Protection Act in Schedule 1 and the sites listing in Appendix 1. So basically, you can say you can remember with this conservation that all of these three they have the same conservation status of vulnerable, Schedule 1 in WPA and Appendix 1 in sites. The next is your the next article is India's exchange of territory boundaries with Myanmar. Okay, so recently we have seen that Indian government has given out proposal that India is going to exchange some land or territorial boundary with Myanmar. Why? For the betterment of cooperation between the both the countries. Now India Myanmar shares around more than 1600 kilometers of boundary, and India said that in the 1600 kilometers of boundary we are going to share around 1.4 square miles, that is 3.4 square kilometers of territory with Myanmar. Okay, it basically tries to solve this 171 kilometer stretch of international boundary dispute between the pillar 65 and 68 in the Manipur district of Chandal. Now, if you look into this, this is pillar number 65 here, and here you have pillar number 68. So, this strong stretch of land, okay, which is around 171 kilometer, is very much conflicted and very much uh, disturbed because of the presence of thick forest and other insurgency groups. So basically, India is going to adjust this territory not not by just sweeping changes, but giving away lands to Myanmar. Okay. Next, if you look into what is the purpose or why is it important that India gives away this land to Myanmar, which is around 1.4 square kilometers, without even thinking about its territorial giveaway to the other country. The reason being is that because of various geopolitical issue and because of the instability in this region and also because of some diplomatical ties. See, if you look into this, it is also very much controversial because the people of Manipur, particularly the militant groups of Manipur, they have criticized the government saying that this land was given away to Myanmar without our consultancy, but yet this is of national importance and we cannot carry on investigation regarding anything related to national importance. So India, when he's giving away this land to Myanmar, definitely there are certain larger goals of India. What are the goals? The first thing is the Myanmar act as a gateway to Southeast Asia. And we know that our plans or our initiative of Act East policy is kind of a halted. Okay, it is not moving as it is supposed to move, as fast it is supposed to move, because of the instability or because of not having a proper relationship with Myanmar. And also, we have seen that Myanmar has inclined towards Chinese, and China has a huge influence on the development and the governance of Myanmar. So India is not able to go with the full-fledged action of Act East policy. So it acts as an gateway to Southeast Asia, and thus maintaining a good relationship with Myanmar for India becomes important. Second thing is that Myanmar also shares a long boundary of, like I said, you 1600, more than 1600 kilometer. So it becomes important for security purpose, and international border cooperation. And the third is definitely countering Chinese influence. So it is important from the Indian side to maintain a cordial relationship with the government of Myanmar and fulfill certain needs and aspects of the Myanmar government, if at the cost of giving away certain territory. But however, this territory, this particular region was in conflict for a very very long period of time, and thus finally India has agreed to give away this particular region to Myanmar. Now, how will this initiative help us, or what is the significance? First thing is that yes, the projects which we are talking about will might get a boost, like the Kaladhan multimodal transportation project and the India Myanmar Thailand trilateral highway. If you look into this Kaladhan multimodal project, it starts from Kolkata. The route of transportation is through the Hooghly bridge here, Hooghly river here, and then from here there is the sea route which goes and connects with this Kaladhan river of Myanmar in a place called Sitwe. And from Sitwe through river, it is connected to Paletwa and Kaletwa. And from there, it is connected by land up to Aizel. So it is a multimodal transport. That is, it gets connected inland waterway, sea route, then by land and up to Aizel by railway transportation. So it's a multi-modal transportation. But however, this program has not been doing well in the recent time, and there is no much development happening in this program. And the second is a very important and aspirational project, that is the India Myanmar Thailand trilateral highway. So we have planned, or we have proposed to connect the region of More, that is in Manipur. This is in Manipur, region of Manipur, to Ping, that is the capital of Myanmar, up to Mawede of Thailand. So this particular project, which is a trilateral highway, that is an highway connecting three countries, is also not developing as it is supposed to develop. So it is our responsibility that we maintain good tie-ups and relationship with Myanmar, so that our idea or our vision of Actis policy is success at a quicker pace or faster. Next is the significance of security concern. That is, we know that in the northeastern region, particularly in the Myanmar region, here this is basically a heaven ground for the breeding of insurgencies in Northeast India, militancy, and other separatist groups like Alpha, Khaplang, and etc. Even in the Kuki Mizo conflicts, you might have seen about how the Kukis has been continuously getting help from the regions of Myanmar in terms of arms and ammunition. So it is a concern for Indian security part also, and thus having a good tie-up with the Myanmar government will enable us in bringing down these insurgency groups or bringing down the hideout camps in Myanmar. Though at present this has fallen down at a drastical rate, just like Naxalism has almost become nil in India. So, but yet there are still presence of insurgent groups in this region, and having good relationship with Myanmar will enable this elimination of these insurgent groups and bringing peace and tranquility in Northeast India. The second insecurity is that this particular route is also called as the uh, golden route, because there is a huge smuggling and trafficking of contrabands, drugs, and etc. Even human trafficking. So it becomes a concern for India that this region, if not controlled and if not countered, will create internal security and also will hamper the economy of the country. The next is why it is important from economical perspective. It is because India and Myanmar has bilateral ties, and in 2025-26 we have done around 1.9 billion dollar trade. Though this might look very little in compared to other countries, but yet looking into the scenario of Myanmar, looking into the political administration of Myanmar, it is one achievement for India. Though in the future we are planning to make it more better in terms of economical trade. Then India and Myanmar also, you know, they are expanding cooperation in terms of critical minerals and rare earth sector. So this is also important from this particular sector of resources. And then the India has increased the Mekong Ganga Cooperation Scholarship, which is basically people to people scholarships, where there is exchange program or exchange of students from both these countries. That is, India will give away some educations for the students of Myanmar in terms of engineering, in terms of doctor, or in terms of any other humanitarian sector. So we have some good relationship with Myanmar, wherein it is not as good as it is supposed to be, as like how we have with Sri Lanka, or how we have with Mauritius or Seychelles or Malaysia. The Myanmar region, the development between these two countries are not becoming as that good it is supposed to be, just because of the coup which happened in Myanmar. Before the coup, it was going good in terms of activist policy, but after the coup, the relationship between these two countries has deteriorated. Not deteriorated, but there is no growth actually. It is not becoming bad, neither it is becoming good, but the growth itself has become stagnant. And definitely the coup in Myanmar, which has happened, definitely we can say that it's instigated by some third party, so that India's vision of activist policy is not successful. Because once India has good connectivity with the Southeast Asian countries, then definitely India is going to spread its wing and spread its presence in the Southeast Asian countries. And here Northeast is going to play a very, very important role, because of the similarity of ethnicity, similarity of culture, similarity of cuisine, similarity of you know attire, similarity of dialects, and etc. So Northeast is going to play a very, very important role in the expansion of Northeast activist policy. Okay, now if you look into this news, this is not something which has recently happened, or which is not something which is new, which has happened, but we have done this earlier with Bangladesh in the year 2015, where we made the amendment, the 100th amendment in our constitution, to grant, or not grant, to exchange enclaves with Bangladesh. So if you look into this border, this is the border of India. Here on this side it is India, and on this side is Bangladesh. If you look into this green color, these are the lands which are the Bangladeshi lands, and here these are the Indian lands. So basically in 2015 we made the 100th amendment act of our constitution for the exchange of enclaves between India and Bangladesh. And this was one very good, very, very, very significant achievement after the independence of India. So 100th amendment is to exchange territories with Bangladesh. What is 101 amendment? GST. So two amendments, remember, 100 is territorial exchange and 101 is your GST. The next article is the Kosper Bikram Sarabhai Medal. Now, this article has been awarded to Annapurna Subramaniam. She is the director of IIA, that is Indian Institute of Astrophysics. Astrophysics. So she, because of her uh, incredible work towards the space and astrophysics, has been awarded with the Bikram Sarabhai Medal. Now, what is this award basically? It is an award which is given for outstanding work of any researcher or any academician in the field of space, for honoring Bikram Sarabhai. Who is Bikram Sarabhai? He is considered as the father of Indian space program. Now, if we look into the duration of this award, it is given of every 2 years, and in 2026, it was awarded to Annapurna Subramaniam. She becomes the first woman to be awarded with this medal, and third globally to be awarded with this medal. Now, if you look into what her work, there is her groundbreaking work was basically stellar population, blue strangler star, stellar population, blue strangler star, galaxy evolution. And here she has used AstroSat for her research. And you have to remember, it is the India's first space telescope developed by India. That is AstroSat. So that is why I have put this AstroSat, so that you relate the name with her. That is Annapurni Subramaniam. Now, if we look into what is COSPER, in simple word, if I tell you, after Bikram Sarabhai came back to India, uh, he basically was the pioneer in developing India's space technology. So he basically formed an organization or institute, COSPER, for the development of space science. And later on, under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru, he also founded or he also started ISRO in India. And he was the first chairman of ISRO. And this award is given in collaboration with COSPER and ISRO. So remember, before ISRO, if there was an institute which worked in space technology, is basically COSPER, and both of the institute was a brainchild of Bikram Sarabhai. The next article is a very, very interesting article, that is fiscal federalism, whether it's an efficiency or it is an equity. Okay, so we know that recently the Finance Commission has reported their 16th Finance Commission for the year 2026 to 31. They've released their or they've published their report. And in the 16th Finance Commission, they have given out a lot of um, uh, you know not provisions, a lot of suggestions and advice to the government for maintaining the fiscal imbalance of the country, or the fiscal federalism. Now, for this, you have to understand what is fiscal and then what is federalism for better understanding of this article. Now, fiscals is something which is related to, fiscal is something which is related to money. And now when you talk about federalism, federalism is basically a form of government where there is a union at the center, and then there are states under the union, and under the states there are local body or local bodies. So fiscal federalism means that the share of money, okay, the share of money, or or the distribution of money by the union to the state and the local body. That is, in India we have federalism form of government where the center is the head. The center takes a decision about the states and the local bodies, followed by the local bodies. In the same way, in India, the center decides which state is to get how much amount of money, and which local body is to get how much amount of money. This is called as, in another way, the fiscal federalism. Okay, in another way, the fiscal federalism works in two kinds of distribution. One is called as the vertical distribution. The second is called as the horizontal distribution. Now, this vertical distribution is nothing but it is a vertical form from the union to the state, then to the local bodies. And the horizontal distribution is based on the population of the state, the geography of the state, the historical background of the state, and etc. Keeping in mind all of these things, the center distributes monetary fund to the states and the local body. And now, to maintain all of this data and to give out provisions and instructions about how to distribute the money, it is the Finance Commission of India who decides on the or regulates on the sharing or distribution of money from the union to the state. Now, what is this Finance Commission? It is we know it's a constitutional body which is formed under the Article 280. Okay, to recommend devolution. What is this devolution? This is what is called as devolution. That is to devolute the monetary or the money from the union to the state. So it is formed under Article 280 to recommend, to recommend the devolution of financial resources between the union and the state. Okay, now the problem of the entire article is basically this imbalance of devolution, okay, which was recommended. Like you said, it is recommended. okay, recommended by the recent 16th commission or the finance commission. Okay, so this devolution imbalance was the problem. We are going to look into it in the later part of our discussion. Okay, okay, what is the objective of finance commission? Tax devolution. That is, the central government collects the tax from the state in the form of GST, and then they give it to the states for their development. Like, if you look into, if this is your state A, this is your state B, this is your state C, and this is your state D. All of these states is going to pay tax to the union government, right? And this union government is going to say, for example, just for your understanding, is going to keep all of this tax in one basket. Okay, okay. This is called as the divisible pool. And after it collects all the money from the state, then the union is going to give back few money to the states for their development. Now, which state is going to give how much money to the union depends upon what tax they are collecting. And all of these basically, all of these comes to the union government in the form of GST. So I can say that A is a developed country, so gives more GST to the union. B is a less developed country, gives lesser GST or the in tax to the union government. But when it comes to tax devolution, then all of the states they get the same percentage of 41%. Okay, divisible pool at 41%. So here A might be giving 100 rupees, B might be giving only 20 rupees. Okay, but when it comes to tax devolution, A and B both are going to get 41%. So this is one major controversy by these states. Okay, we're going to look into it. Next, what is the controversy or what is the major recommendation of the finance commission and which has resulted into debate and controversy? The major recommendation of the finance commission is that in 2000, the 15th finance commission, they said that the tax devolution has to be 41%. Like on the other diagrams, we have seen that from the basket, all the states they get 41% of the tax from the union for the developmental purpose. They said it has to be 41%. But after these, more than 18 states they came forward and they said ki our contribution to the divisible pool is more, but in return we only get 41%. But there are certain states who contributes less in the divisible pool, but they also get 41%. So what is the difference, or how are we equal? That is why it was talk about equity. We're talking about the equity in the article heading. Here they say that it's fine, 41, we are going to give our tax into the divisible pool, and we are going to agree to whatever the finance commission says, but make the tax devolution from 41 to 50%. But the finance commission disagreed to increase the tax devolution from 41 to 50%. Next is that finance commission also gives grant in aid to the states. Say for example, even after getting the tax devolution of 41%, the state's expenditure and revenue is not matching and the state is in debt. In such scenario, the finance commission has said that the union government can give certain grant in aids for the balancing the monetary of the particular state. And here the grant in state was reduced to 9.4 lakhs from 10.1 lakh in the financial in the 15th finance commission. And though it might look a very little number when it compare in the lakh crore format, but if you look into the percentage decline was 8.3 from 19.4%, which is more than half percent decline. So this is also one controversy, that you have not increased the tax devolution, and also you have decreased the grant in aids. Now, the third controversy is that greater focus on performance based transfer. Now, when this controversy arises regarding grant in aid, then the Finance Commission says that the amount of money given to the states will be based on their performance. Okay, that is, we know every state has a per capita income, and depending on this per capita income, the state is going to get grant in aids. So if the state is a developed state, then he's going to get more grant in aids. A poorer state is going to get less grant in aids. So basically, this is something which is not an equity. That is, the richer states will become richer and the poorer will become poorer. But the grant in aid should be given in such a way that the poorer states or the backward states gets more grant in aid for improving the equity in the country. Okay, next, when it talks about that is devolution formula has changed, that it says that the income distance weightage has reduced from 45% to 42%. What is this income distance? Income distance is basically the distance of per capita income between two states. That is, say for example, if Assam's per capita income is 100 rupees and Bihar's per capita income is 70 rupees, then the income distance is 30 rupees. And here it says that the income distance weighting has reduced from 45% to 42.5%, and 10% weightage has been given for the contribution of GDP, rewarding only the economically strong state. Like I have said you, as per the recommendation, the states which are economically stronger will keep on becoming stronger, but the states which are economically not stronger will keep on becoming poorer and poorer. And this controversy has been raised by different states, where they said the first thing, 41% should be improved to 50%. Next is that the grant in aids has been reduced, and when the Finance Commission said that the grant in aid will be given on the basis of performance, this was again controversial, because performance is not equal for all the states, and thus it will not be an efficient distribution of money to from the center to the states. And also the Finance Commission state asked the state for improving the taxation system and improving the internal monetary structure for better collection of money for state development. Basically, it is something where the Finance Commission is acting in a way which is hypocrite. That is, you're telling the states to get improved in their monetary policy, but you're not telling the center to do anything. Because ultimately, if you look into GST, the states are paying the GST directly to the union government. So if the states do not pay the GST, definitely union government will not have anything. So it is something that you have to ask the union government to increase the efficiency and increase their source of income. But yes, definitely this is not possible because we are in a federal country. But yet, telling the states to do it and not telling the union not to do anything is something which could be considered as a hypocritic decision. So basically, this is the controversy regarding the fiscal uh, federalism, which talks about efficiency versus equity. So whether we should look into efficiency or we should make it an equity among the states. So that's all for today. Thank you for staying with me. Hope to see you in the next current affairs session. So please subscribe to our channel, and also feel free to comment and like our videos. Thank you.